have already, I think, Boris in the room. Karen and Boris know each other. I don't see Boris, but I'm sure if Boris says hello, I'm gonna find you, Boris. Oh,
Yeah, I'm here. Can you see
right.
me now?
Yes, there is a lot of people. I'm gonna pin you so that everybody can see you. I'm very grateful that you were able to join us today. If it's okay with you, I will say just a few words about you, and then we can start with your presentation, if it's okay.
Sure,
So
absolutely.
thank you. I'm going to give first of all, welcome, Boris, and thank you for being with us and for taking the time to discuss with us about your work. Boris van Zanten is a senior consultant with the World Bank and is one of the core members of the Nature-Based Solutions community of practice. In this role, Boris is leading the development of knowledge products that should help World Bank teams mainstreaming nature-based solutions in operations. In addition, as a nature-based solutions expert, Boris provides technical support to operations for the World Bank's urban disaster risk management, resilience, and land and environmental global practices. Prior to joining the World Bank, Boris worked as a researcher and as a consultant. And he's here today to give us a talk on nature-based solutions for climate resilience in World Bank financed investment projects. Thank you so much, Boris, for being here, and I'm leaving the floor to you.
Great, thanks, Marta, for the introduction. Yeah, so just maybe before I start on the timing, so we have about half an hour, right, for presentation, and then the rest for questions. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Right now, let me see if I can share my screen. That works.
And usually we collect, if there are urgent questions, we leave them in the chat. And if there is anything urgent, I can stop you and ask for a clarification. Otherwise, we collect questions at the end in the chat and in person from students.
Okay, great, excellent. All right, yeah, because I think I will share my screen full time, so I will full screen,
Yeah.
so I will not see anything else. So
Yes,
yeah,
no
you
problem.
just feel free to interrupt me if there is anything urgent. But yeah, otherwise,
At the
indeed
end.
happy to address any questions at the end of the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sounds good. Um, right, yeah, I mean, so first of all, thanks a lot to Marta for, inviting me and giving me the chance to tell you something about my work. Um, my name, as Marta introduced me, my name is Boris van Zanten. I'm from the Netherlands originally, but based in Washington, D.C. And here I am one of the project leads of our global program on nature-based solutions for climate resilience. Um, so, I will talk a bit more about my work, but for myself, yeah, I'm approaching this topic um, as with a technical background in environmental economics and environmental science and geography. Um, so yeah, I work quite a lot on cost benefit analysis, appraisal, um, uh, yeah, basically everything you need to do um, to assess whether it's worth investing in nature-based solutions. Um, so my presentation today is basically three parts. So it's first part is an introduction to the work that we are doing here at the World Bank on nature-based solutions in my team. The second part is um, a bit of an overview or like a bit of a description of a guideline that we put together for cost benefit analysis of nature-based solutions for resilience, how to go about it at a project level. So really thinking about, you know, practical applications, right? And real world, in a real world situations. And And the third part is where I want to just go a bit more in depth on a specific case study, a project that I worked on in Indonesia, to look a bit closer at how you can use economic analysis um, of nature-based solutions to make the case for large-scale investment, and how it can be used strategically at the national level to inform government programs. So those are sort of the three pieces that I want to touch on today. So, I mean, first of all, I guess you're all sort of students on this topic, so I don't think I need to convince you. But I guess first of all, I mean, we start from the observation that nature is providing a lot of benefits to people, right? So it's nature, of course, nature itself, and it has its intrinsic value um, um, in terms of the diversity of the biodiversity. But of course, there are um, a lot of benefits that people also enjoy from being in and around nature, and many people call those ecosystem services. And you can think about spaces for recreation, food production, of course, but also sort of some of the regulating some of the risks from natural disasters and climate change. Um, and of course, as we are sort of entering um, the Anthropocene, and like more and more landscapes are becoming human dominated, these functions of nature are sometimes lost, or at least severely reduced. um, and, uh, and that is sort of where we see some serious sustainability challenges. In addition to that, there is of course the human impact on the climate, and this results, of course, in, well, I don't think I have to explain that, but of course it results in increasing temperatures, but also in increasing intensity of extreme events, such as storms, floods, etc., and heat waves. So, of course, and in addition to that, of course, there is the impact of nature loss on biodiversity. Um, um, and we see right now, of course, that many species are at risk of extinction. So this combined, I think these challenges combined really make the case for nature-based solutions, right? So really thinking smart in a smart way about working with natural systems um, to bring nature back in infrastructure investments, in policy and planning, um, and at the same time also sort of protecting or restoring biodiversity as well, while you have all the other benefits, of course. Um, so, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on definitions and all that, but I think it is important to recognize that um, the UN definition of nature-based solutions is quite um, holistic and strict. So it really says that NbS should do basically everything at the same time, right? So it should um, um, you know bring social, economic, and environmental benefits or ecosystem services, but also um, bring biodiversity benefits. So you kind of need to check all these boxes in order to meet this definition, which is poses an interesting challenge, and we'll get back to that later. Um, so I think now we can talk a little bit more about how we operationalize this concept, right, in practice. So my team works on nature-based solutions for what we call for climate resilience, and it's basically solutions that at least have a benefit that regulates climate or disaster risk. So often this is about of course places where people are, so in urban areas or coastal areas, where these solutions can help um, reduce some of those climate impacts. And you can think about it at different scales, right? So it's sometimes really small scale, looking at neighborhood scale, looking at pocket parks, bioretention areas, green roofs, etc. From to the sort of the landscape or the catchment scale, where you actually look at a full sort of river catchment, and then look from sort of managing forests upstream to protecting river floodplains and to coastal ecosystems such as mangroves or sandy shores, dunes, and reefs. So, and this is also quite important, right? To have this different, to have this multi-scale perspective. So to look at what can you do at the larger level and what can you do at a local level. Another key sort of principle, what we see when looking at, working with nature-based solutions, especially those that regulate climate and disaster risk, is that it's really key to look at the integration with gray infrastructure, especially in developing country context, right? Because of course they have much less functioning gray infrastructure often than developed countries have. So it's important to tell the honest story that without gray infrastructure, some of the risks will be too large. So you probably need a combination of green and gray in order to be most efficient and cost effective, and to get the best benefit out of your investments. So you will probably need some drainage infrastructure always, right? But you can complement it with bioretention areas, for example, and other sort of greener measures to achieve the same results. But then you will get these other benefits as well, right? So more like, if you look at this example in the sort of the urban context, you get more like these urban livability benefits and opportunities for recreation, shading, etc., that you wouldn't get with only the investment in gray infrastructure. Another piece of it is, of course, the urban heat side. So these urban interventions, they can, we really see a lot of evidence that at a city level, they can really regulate temperature. So if you plan for those small-scale interventions, it's also quite important to consider, the effect of them at the city level. So in addition to that, of course, there are various sort of other co-benefits, and one of the important ones is, of course, also sort of the climate regulation piece of it. So, and this is really a challenge for us to sort of think about nature-based solutions in an integrated way, where you look both at the climate mitigation potential alongside the risk reduction factor. So, yeah, we've seen actually quite a lot of quite a substantial increase of investment at the World Bank in these type of projects. So we have reviewed, we constantly keep track of the full investment portfolio. And we've seen that since 2012, there are 211 investment projects, to be precise, that have components with nature-based solutions for climate resilience. And often it's like a part of an infrastructure project, right? So there's, typically it's maybe around 20-25% of the total investment is NbS. And if you add up the value of all those components, you come up with a committed financing amount of around $10 billion over the last 10, 11 years, committed to investing in NbS for climate resilience. So if you add up all the indicators linked to that, it's like about 3 million hectares of rehabilitating or restored and protecting about 35,000 kilometers of coastline for riverbanks. So it's not nothing. It's quite a substantial investment already. And here you see the geographic distribution of those projects. So just to pick out a few examples, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think this one is nice because it was in the news recently. So there were these massive floods in Poland last year, 2024, which really were quite intense. A lot of rainfall at the same time, and there were big floods in many parts of Central Europe. But actually, in Poland, a lot of the flooding was avoided, and a big piece of that was actually due to this Odra river basin flood protection project, which was a very large investment project financed by the World Bank, where there were like really large room for the river type of investments, where they moved whole villages out, created a much larger floodplain for the river to flow, uh, um, where they make use of these multi-purpose dry polders that were in the dry season, or in the low, when the water is low, they're used for farming. And if there is a peak flood, they're used to basically as flood retention areas. So this was really a project, like a $1 billion investment, which is quite large, but on the other hand, really worth every penny if you look at the avoided damages of last year's flood. Another kind of famous project that the World Bank financed is this um, urban park in the city of Beira in Mozambique. So it is sort of also a flood overflow area along a river in the city of Mozambique, which has combines playgrounds and football pitches with vegetation and mangroves. Um, it's quite a large park, and it's functioned very well in terms of creating flood retention capacity also during the recent tropical cyclones that hit Mozambique, unfortunately, quite frequently. So those are just some example projects that we have worked on. Um, so you know, and of course we've seen this sort of interest coming and growing, and uh, but um, but at the same time there's still a lot of challenges, when it comes to institutional readiness, technical expertise, knowledge, and therefore we have this team that I work on, that I co-lead, and we have about 25, 30 people that work at the global level on nature-based solutions for climate resilience at the bank, and our role is really to exchange knowledge, to facilitate training, to help the people that work on the ground on projects to do good, feasibility studies and technical designs. In order to, generate successful outcomes with the project. So that's really what we focus on with our team. If you look at naturebasedsolutions.org, I think I provided some links also to Marta. You can see some of the publications that we've worked on with our team. That some of a pretty good overview of nature-based solutions work in this sort of this niche of nature-based solutions at the World Bank. I think I'll just go to this guideline. So one of the things that we worked on, and actually Marta was there on the presentation of the launch event, so that was great, and I think that's also where sort of we got to know each other a little bit. So is this guideline on assessing the benefits and costs of nature-based solutions for climate resilience. So we wanted to sort of come up with a book that really helps at the project level to figure out how you do those kind of studies, because I think we can have a academic discussion about valuation methods and things like that, but often project developers, people working on projects, they deal with much more practical questions around, I have limited money, I have limited time, I have limited data. How can I still come up with something meaningful, right? Given the constraints that I have. So that's kind of the question we try to tackle with this guideline. So something really actionable and really sort of considering sort of the constraints that you have in a project, right? Without going too academic. So taking the state-of-the-art academic knowledge, but translating it into what can you do at the project level. So we try to really work from a set of concrete interventions, specific NbS families or NbS types that you can see here on the slide, and really sort of map out, what are sort of the processes in which these specific types of nature-based solutions regulate um, uh, climate hazards and natural hazards. And to do this, we really sort of use this ecosystem services approach where you first look at the process and then link it to services and how it benefits people. So, there's a few of these tables that you can see here on the slide where you say, okay, look like, okay, urban green spaces, they, provide shade and they um, enhance infiltration and storage, etc. So we really think about specific processes linked to specific interventions. So that is sort of the climate and disaster risk regulation piece, right? But then of course we want people in the projects to value also the other benefits, right, that come with NbS, because often when you compare these solutions to gray infrastructure, it's actually these other benefits that help make the case. So we also give quite detailed guidance on what kind of valuation methods you can use to value some of these other services that come along, right, within a forest, for example. So, how to sort of estimate the value in terms of biodiversity, for example, in a city, like enhanced connectivity, for instance, or how to estimate the value, of having access to green spaces for recreation. So, of course, there are all kinds of valuation methods for this, but then we try to sort of provide, actionable and sort of achievable approaches for project developers to get to sort of a combination of like valuing 3 or 4 of these benefits for each project. Then also we looked into costs. So I think that's also quite uh, often an unknown, right, when you think about nature-based solutions. And what we hear often from our clients is like, and when I say clients, I mean governments in countries where we work, right? So almost all countries in the world, middle and low income countries in the world, is that, they find it very difficult to understand the operational cost, the OPEX, right? The operations cost of nature-based solutions, because I guess, there's for many solutions, the nature-based variant is a bit cheaper in terms of initial capital and capital investment that you need in the beginning of a project. But then you see generally that the operational expenses are starting to rise more quickly, because you have to start maintaining right away, basically, with protecting the area, making sure there's no encroachment, maybe doing some maintenance on vegetation, things like that, right? So this is a critical piece to figure out at the beginning of a project, like what does it mean actually in terms of capex and opex over time, so you can plan accordingly in terms of your project financing. Another piece is more like figuring out what kind of level of detail do you need in different phases in a project, right? So you can imagine when you start conceptualizing a project, start thinking about what investments could look like. You start with some quick analysis that are not so expensive, not so heavy in terms of data. Whereas when you actually designing, a piece of nature-based infrastructure like that needs to be constructed, you have to probably get something much more detailed, right? So this is something else that we try to figure out. And I'm going to skip over this figure now, but basically because I'm going to get to it in a minute. But basically what we try to figure out is like, we identified 3 tiers with different methods, and we try to figure out, okay, when do you need what kind of method, depending on where you are in the project, right? Are you identifying your investments? Are you just starting the conversation with the government? Are you already doing sort of more like the cost-benefit analysis or feasibility studies, or are you already doing like really, implementation, right? So you really do design and monitoring impact, etc. So for these, we figured for these 3 tiers, for these 3 phases, you need have different tiers of analysis that are linked to different specific methods, right, and data that you need. And this is what we try to map out here. And I will have go a bit more in depth on this when I talk about the case study. So is it okay if I take 10 more minutes or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much.
That's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I would like to close with a case study. This is the Mangroves for Coastal Resilience project in Indonesia, and it's quite interesting because it's Indonesia, and I'm not sure you guys are familiar, but Indonesia is a middle income country. Um, so that means that they're like if they get financing from the World Bank, it's not free, but there is a cost linked to it. But nevertheless, Indonesia has taken a $400 million loan just focused on mangrove restoration and sustainable management. So that's not unsubstantial, and as far as I know, sort of the largest project of this kind globally. Although I think in India they're preparing some similar projects right now. Myself and my team, we have been quite involved in this project from the identification phase till right now it's under implementation. Yeah, we've done different activities with the government of Indonesia and with this team. But what I would like to talk about today is really how we help them with the project design and identification of investments, and what role in economic analysis played in that process. So maybe just really first a quick overview of what the project looks like now. So there is as you can see, there's a component 2, which is the largest component, which is rehabilitation and sustainable management of mangroves. So there's a piece of 75,000 hectares of rehabilitation and restoration of the mangrove ecosystems, and also sustainable management, enhanced sustainable management of 4 large mangrove coastal landscapes. And then there are a few other components more on the institutional side, and also improving livelihood opportunities for communities living in mangrove areas. So that component 3 is really focused on how can you combine mangrove management, sustainable mangrove management, with generating income activities for local communities, right? Such as sustainable extraction of natural resources, maybe combining it with some food production, sustainable agriculture, things like that. So this is what the project looks like right now, but we weren't there, right? So this work probably started. I guess it started at the beginning of the pandemic, and of course, a big reason for the government of Indonesia to start this engagement is like, I guess it's a reflex, right? That we saw around the world with pandemic is like an increased emphasis on jobs, right? So I think also in the Great Depression in the 1930s, like you saw quite a lot of these nature, reforestation projects just to create jobs. And I think this initially the rationale of the government of Indonesia was a little bit the same, right? In this case, so they saw this as an opportunity to put a lot of people to work on restoring their mangroves, while also bringing other benefits for climate resilience, but also for potentially engaging on sort of carbon markets, and of course other livelihood benefits linked to fisheries and sustainable agriculture, etc. So just maybe as a starting point, I mean, we've seen that there's quite a lot of mangrove deforestation in Indonesia over the last decades. As you see on the slide here, there's like a bunch of different drivers for that. I think, roughly you can see like in the west of the country, so more close to like the Malaysian part, and so mostly on Sumatra and Western Kalimantan, it's like conversion to palm oil plantations. Whereas in more like Eastern Kalimantan and Sulawesi, it's mostly um, shrimp farming, so conversion to aquaculture. Um, and those are, I guess, the main drivers of change. In some areas, it's also urban expansion, but it's not not with the magnitude of the other drivers. So this is sort of what we're dealing with, right? Um, but at the same time, of course, this goes at the cost of the other benefits that mangroves provide. And then the key one is, um, the protection against coastal um, storms, coastal flooding, and surges. I mean, an important demonstration of this was the Indian Ocean tsunami, where it became very clear that communities sheltered by mangroves, they were much less affected by the devastating impact of the tsunami. And after that event, a lot of modeling started into the hydrodynamics of this, right? How does this actually work? How do you have to design mangrove belts to provide sufficient protection against these events? So, just to say, right, mangroves provide these coastal flood risk reduction benefits, but also a lot of other benefits linked to carbon storage and sequestration and biodiversity, but also sediment management and water quality, fish production, etc. So what the question was in this study was really sort of try to work at the national level. So try to think about help the government think through at the national level. Um, what is sort of how to come up with areas to prioritize and where do mangroves provide what kind of benefits. And of course, we had to work with this in a situation of quite limited um, data. So, we don't really have much local data at all. Although there was a pilot with a natural capital counting, which had generated pretty high resolution maps of the mangrove areas, so mangrove extents. So this was a good sort of baseline information on like where do we actually find mangroves, right? This was much better data than the global products that are around, the global mangrove watches of this world, etc., which are very, which are not so good at capturing more narrow mangrove belts, etc. So in this, if we bring back this framework, like okay, how should you design your research given the question that you have? In this case, it was really sort of a tier two type of analysis. So we really, were in the project preparation phase. We wanted to inform the economic and financial analysis of the project and the feasibility studies. So we need sort of this moderate level of um, detail where we have consultations with the government about what are the most important benefits in the scoping phase. Like we want to do a full cost benefit analysis in the decision support framework. We are using a probabilistic flood risk assessment using global data that was already out there, or that was developed by colleagues from the University of California, Santa Cruz. And this study also quantifies already the avoided damages um, of mangroves using in a raster format, so we know it's spatially explicit for each location in the country. And then um, we engage with the government to understand the costs. So we use local data in terms of costing information, and we also use meta-analytic value functions and biophysical quantification for valuing the other benefits, so beyond coastal flood risk reduction. So in this case, carbon storage and sequestration, um, fisheries and raw material extraction, etc. So this is sort of the framework, what it looks like. So as said, I use sort of this map of mangrove extent that was prepared by this national level natural capital accounting pilot, which is a high resolution mangrove map. And then we look at the a bunch of cost components, so restoration, maintenance, and opportunity costs. And on the benefit side, we look at flood protection, carbon storage and sequestration, fisheries, raw material extraction, and tourism. So I guess in the interest of time, I should skip over some things here, but basically the cost of mangrove restoration were basically just obtained from real data from the government. So they were already doing quite some mangrove restoration, so they had a pretty good idea of what it costs. So this is just the implementation cost of the intervention, right? So it's not it has nothing beyond that. And then in addition to that, we also looked at land opportunity costs. So there was a study that the authors were kind enough to share with us um, their gridded data of 5 kilometer resolution of what is the average productivity of agriculture, plantations and pastures in across Indonesia, and they gridded this based on accessibility to markets and local biophysical conditions. They modeled these costs, and it gives you an understanding of where you have high pressure, right, high deforestation pressure, or on the mangrove ecosystem. And then for the other benefits, of course, as I tried to explain earlier, you have like 3 months, right, for this analysis, so you need to come up with something very quickly. So rely as much as possible on data provided by other studies, where coastal protection was basically ready to use data set from Menendez et al., which is like published in Nature. It's like a big global spatially explicit model, prepared by colleagues from University of California, Santa Cruz. We worked with the local data to estimate sort of biophysical climate regulation processes. So mangrove densities in Indonesian mangroves, like what are sort of, the half-life, actual emissions after you deforest the mangrove area, like try to estimate all these processes, etc. And then we also worked with some, actually quite an interesting data set, crowdsourced data sets from TripAdvisor data on specific, mangrove tourism, which is a little bit niche. So the first thing we did was try to sort of come up with these sort of cost-benefit profiles at the national level. So when you just aggregate all the data for 1 hectare, so it just helped us to communicate to the government, like, okay, restoration is nice, but actually probably conservation is much more cost-effective in most places, because there is just such a big drive in the government, to do restoration, right? So this is while this is of course very coarse and aggregated data, it is helpful to tell the story to the government. Okay, like restoration. I know you want to do restoration because you want to build something new, but in many ways conservation is more effective in sort of protecting these ecosystem services. And the other, I'm skipping over a lot of the steps in the analysis right now, but just in the interest of time, the other thing what it allowed us to do is really to look at the district level, at like sort of the marginal costs and benefits of protecting or restoring a hectare of mangroves. So what we did here is like really to look at, in one specific district, what do we estimate the costs and benefits to be there of restoring in this map, it's restoration, restoring an additional hectare of mangrove. I don't really like to put red colors on the map because it's kind of shows like, okay, maybe you don't have to do anything here, but it is quite a good signal that basically these red areas, right, is where you see most of the deforestation, because there's the highest pressure, because the opportunity costs are the highest and the benefits of restoring are relatively limited. So it gives you sort of an indication of, okay, where do you find the highest benefits of restoration? When you draw the picture for protection, it looks very different again. But with this data set that's behind this, right, we helped the government of Indonesia to come up with scenarios for the project, right? So to focus on specific provinces, different interventions, and they used this data set to look at the costs and benefits of potential interventions across different provinces. All right, yeah, I think that was my last slide, my last example. I guess I'll stop there. I hope this was useful to give you a bit of an idea of the work we're doing, and also share this case from Indonesia with you.
Boris, thank you so much. It was very interesting to guide us through the methodologies that I used. It's a little bit of behind the scene of the mechanics of how it works. It was really very helpful. There was a question in the chat, but I would also like to invite students to put questions in the chat and engage with Boris. I know Sergin has a question. I'm gonna let you take the floor. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation and your sharing about the mangroves. I have a question about that. Because in the past 6 courses we have been taking, the mangrove has been mentioned so many times, almost every day for every time for the session. And but as we know, the NbS solution should be increase the biodiversity. If we rely on too much on the mangrove, what will that happen? Like a disease outbreak that can affect the mangrove is actually kind of increase the vulnerability of the.
Yeah. You want to take a few questions, Marta, or should I just answer one by one?
You want, you can start answering this question. I don't know if they're super connected, but then maybe we can try to aggregate if it's too late. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, of course, yeah, there are some different answers to that, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, mangroves are popular, right? So it's many people who are not really an expert in this field now, they think, oh, nature-based solutions, oh, we should do mangroves or something. So this is indeed a bit of a risk, and of course, it's not the full picture, right? So I could have also presented something else. I mean, in our portfolio, we definitely don't see only mangroves. So there's a lot of urban green infrastructure projects, like a lot of urban parks, retention areas, and things like that. Also, we see quite a lot of projects at the catchment level that that work more like integrated, catchment management, like reforestation upstream, managing sediments, creating more room for rivers to accommodate for increasing intensity of storms and things like that. So it's definitely not the only solution that we see, but yeah, it is sort of one that has get a lot of attention, right? Because I guess for a couple of reasons. Because one, they have showed their value so well, during the Indian Ocean tsunami. So there was like a lot of attention generated at that time, and a lot of NGOs and multilateral organizations started financing mangroves after that, especially in that area. And then, of course, there are the other pieces, like the carbon sequestration and storage piece to it. And it's like, of course, we all know mangroves are huge carbon sinks. So I think that those two factors together have led to sort of quite a big attention for mangroves. And then, of course, biodiversity. You're right. No, it's key, and it's one of the things that was not in this presentation, but it's of course, one of the key parts of the dialogue when you think about, especially when you compare restoration versus protection, right? Because when you restore mangroves in areas where they had been deforested before, or where they were not even there, maybe you will not get the same biodiversity results, of course, as when you protect sort of a pristine mangrove area. So yeah, that's definitely should be part of the equation there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Boris. I put in the chat a little article from the American Museum of Natural History about why mangroves matter. And I just wanted to emphasize one aspect that was touched upon a little bit by Boris as well. Don't imagine mangroves as a monoculture, but more like a complex ecosystem that hosts a variety of species. And so there is a biodiversity gain in mangroves interventions. We have also Firdevs and Simone. Maybe Firdevs, you want to ask your question, and then we can also let Simone, and then we aggregate the two questions for Boris.
Thank you. Hi, Boris.
Please, Virtas. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Boris. Really interesting presentation, and good to see that the infrastructure project finance is having the blended approach towards delivering infrastructure gray and green and NbS as part of the infrastructure. Though you mentioned number of projects financed by the World Bank, what is the attitude of the commercial lenders in terms of bankability of such projects? That's the first question. And the second question, do you know any policy-based approaches where, for example, the procurement laws contain mandatory requirements in terms of NbS being part of the project? Thank you.
And do you want to take this question, or are we asking Simone to share her?
Oh, no, I can go ahead quickly. No, I think those are very good questions, Frieda. Thanks. I think that's two very critical points. So maybe first on the commercial lenders, yeah. I mean, this is all about the business case, right? So I mean, maybe you can distinguish the landscape in two parts. So one is really sort of investing in nature for business, and the other one is more like sort of the softer piece that used to be more like CSR and even now you see the sort of voluntary. I guess it's a bit of in between, like more like those sort of science-based targets and sort of voluntary contributions on voluntary carbon markets and things like that. I mean, so let's focus a bit on sort of the nature-based solutions for regulating climate and disaster risk, right? So there, I think what you see is there has been quite some commercial or private sector investment, maybe not directly commercial lenders, but private sector investment in those solutions that have a clear business case. And I guess some of the clearer examples have been like water funds, for example. So you have like a catchment that you're protecting, and you create, you enhance the water quality, and then it generates, it results in reduced treatment costs for utilities, and then so there is sort of a direct business case there, right? There are a few other business cases, right, that we've seen, like such as coastal tourism, for example. There are some coastal areas where you have coastal like hotels and stuff investing in sort of coastal like soft solutions or NbS to protect the coastline, because they have a direct business interest in generating these tourism revenues in those areas. And when you put a concrete seawall there, there's not many tourists coming there. So there's also a business case there. And then there are a few others that have some potential. I mean, there has been quite a lot of investment in a lot of these larger financing instruments like blue bonds and green bonds and things like that. Of course, they are much more focused on sort of the food production type of NbS, if you will. So like sustainable fisheries to manage coastal ecosystems, and all these things that sort of return that have a for-profit angle to it, right? But just reducing disaster risk itself often is a bit more tricky, because it's often more public good nature, right? So it's not so easy to monetize the benefits, and therefore it's not so easy for private sector or private lenders to step in there. So there's of course some examples that people always talk about in terms of like insurance products that look at that that you insure coastal ecosystems that have a risk reduction function. Like there is this project there are a bunch of projects in Central America where they have developed a reef insurance, which is quite an interesting mechanism and an interesting product. But of course, it's also very it's depending on a lot of philanthropy money for huge transaction costs for now. So hasn't really proven very scalable yet. But it is sort of a way to sort of de-risk and sort of use natural assets to de-risk and develop some sort of insurance product around it. So yeah, that's that's sort of my 1 minute take on the commercial or the private sector angle to these type of solutions. Um, Procurement laws. I mean, yeah, maybe if we put it a bit broader, in terms of regulations in general. I mean, we've seen in several countries, like in UK, some other European countries, for example, in urban areas, regulations around, impervious services, right? So if you develop a new area, like so much should be pervious surface, so you can have infiltration capacity and these kind of things. So there are some regulations around that, and also some procurement rules around that, right? Um, in the developing world where we mostly work, it's not that much yet, right? We're not really there yet with these kind of things. So for us, it's more about more sort of the broader enabling environment that we have to work on. So it's more about what one of the things that we often run into is more like very practical other questions, right? Like we work in for example, we work in an urban flood risk management project in Indonesia, which does like investments in. So it's not this project that I presented, it's an urban project. So it does investments in urban rivers in 5 cities. And they actually want to do nature-based solutions, right? They want to work with widening the river channel and do this sort of create this sort of urban parks that are in flood zone area. So you create some green spaces around the river that like flood every 5 years or something and you create some multifunctional spaces for recreation there and these kind of things. But the problem there is often that you see that their own engineering guidelines don't allow them to do this, right? So like some guy wrote their engineering guidelines 60 years ago, and then they are like, so it's more like a sort of inertia in the in their own technical guidelines, in their enabling environment, their policies that are blocking some of those. That are blocking sort of the ability to invest in some of these solutions. So yeah, I hope that that helps.
Thank you, Boris. We have several questions in the chat as
Thank
well.
you.
Thank you, Firdavs. Maybe, Simone, you can ask your question a bit succinctly so we can go also to the other questions in the chat. There is a lot going on there. Thank you, Simone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Boris, for the great presentation. I think my big takeaway right now will be showing the stakeholder the return of investment by doing the neutral-based solution. My question, back to the world map where you showed where projects are happening. I didn't see Western Africa countries. Is that because of lack of data, or because there is no incentive from the government, their government, or because it's not a diverse ecosystem? So that's why we don't see those projects in those specific regions.
Sure. Yeah, let me share the screen back. Put the screen back up. So where is it? Here. Okay. Yeah, so I mean there are some projects, right, in Western Africa. So I have to put a few sort of caveats, or a few like sort of maybe say a few things that help interpreting this map. So first of all, this is just a World Bank portfolio, right? So World Bank investment portfolio. And then second, these are just projects that have, in our review, that have one of the key measurable benefits is reducing disaster or climate risk. So in practice, these are projects that are, urban projects or sometimes, landscape restoration projects, sometimes coastal management projects, things like that. So it doesn't really include just large scale, forest restoration or agroforestry projects that, that have mostly sort of like, let's say, food production or a nature objective, right? Or like, so that's maybe just to sort of contextualize this. But yeah, in addition to that, it's of course also a matter of government capacity, right? So on the one hand side, actually, we see quite a lot of projects in Africa because because the donors are very interested, right, in doing it. So many donors that we have on our side, they would like to do these things in Africa. At the same
Okay.
time, of course, there's also just um, there are countries that are low-income countries often,
Mm-hmm.
and they often have sort of, I wouldn't say other priorities, but often the type of projects that are implemented are really sort of in the emergency project kind of nature, right? Where you try to get some things, some basic services off the ground, and then maybe nature-based solutions are not the first thing that you think about. So that combined with sort of the technical capacity that you need to implement those projects are maybe some of the barriers, right? But at the same
Okay.
time, we do see some investment coming off the ground because, of course, there is a clear value. Also, there is a huge investment need in infrastructure. So there might be sort of a part that can be nature-based infrastructure, and
Mm-hmm.
so we do see quite some urban projects actually. We worked on urban projects in Niger, in Mali, in Senegal, and in Chad, in Sierra Leone, now also Mauritania, where we actually we do work on those investing in MbS in urban context, and also
Mm-hmm.
there's this huge coastal program called a regional program that's called West Africa Coastal Areas Program, which has also quite a lot of investments in coastal resilience, right? Because I guess you're familiar with West Africa. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot of the sandy shoreline, right? There's a lot of erosion issues
Yes. Mm-hmm.
along the coast, and so there, in Mauritania, for example, we financed the dune restoration project, and in Ghana, there's a mangrove restoration and protection project financed by this WACA program. So, yeah, there's definitely some things happening.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Boris. There are a couple of other questions. It's already 12:15, and I don't know if you need to rush away. Do you have time for one extra question, maybe?
Yeah, that's fine. I have time. Yeah.
There is one very quick question related. I'm gonna read two questions, so you have two of them bundled. One is very quick. Is there a centralized contact agency in Indonesia responsible to manage the restoration after the funds are received, to include the local communities? And there is also a question from Paul. This was previously Emmy. And then Paul asked if I understand you correctly, in the beginning, you described the UNCCD definition as holistic and strict, and that can create challenges. Could you elaborate on that? Would you, from a World Bank perspective, argue for a less strict MBS definition? Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, so in Indonesia, yeah, indeed, of course, so maybe just a general note on how World Bank projects are implemented now. So they are financed by the World Bank, but the implementation is the responsibility of the government. So there is just a project implementation unit in one of the ministries that oversees the implementation, and the World Bank has a more of like an advisory role and like sort of reviewing the procurement and these kind of things. Yes, of course, there is a work with local communities. Of course, it is a challenge, right? It's more like an internal institutional challenge in Indonesia itself, right? To like how to do this, right? Because you have different ministries that are jointly implementing the program, and then of course, Indonesia is a very decentralized country with quite a lot of power, also at the provincial level and the regional level. So it's not so easy to, and then they actually have to eventually do the works, right? So there is what I understand from my colleagues who are working on a day-to-day basis with the government in Indonesia, this is kind of the biggest challenge in the project, right? So how do you sort of manage the fights between the different ministries, and how do you sort of organize, or how do they organize sort of the implementation across different governance levels? So yeah, that is on Indonesia. the other question on the definition, yeah, I think it's a good question, right? Because this is something that we struggle with sometimes. Because we want, of course, we don't want to do greenwashing, right? We want to do proper nature-based solutions that are not just because this is, this is the first inclination when you talk to engineers about nature-based solutions. They just, oh yeah, we just built this concrete thing and then we put some trees on top, right? Something like that. So this is the first thing they sort of want to do, and then you have to go through this process of sort of doing conversations and bringing in specialists to say, okay, no, actually you should use the natural system to manage these processes, right? And it's not just about putting some trees on the top. But then at the same time, we have to sort of figure out what is achievable, right, in terms of measuring outcomes and measuring all these outcomes at the same time. It's like becomes very difficult. Like we cannot tell the government to measure all these 20 or whatever benefits and biodiversity metrics for each single investment, because it just becomes very hard to manage. So this is something that we're dealing with, right? So how in the design phase, how do you make sure you can evaluate these different aspects, right? That you can evaluate the biodiversity impact, that you can evaluate sort of the climate and disaster risk reduction impact, but also these other benefits. And this is, of course, this also poses also a challenge for us internally, because our sectors, like one sector is more interested in this outcome and the other sector is more interested in the other outcome. So that is something we're dealing with, and we're trying to advise our teams on. Like we also have a guideline now on like indicators. So how do you, if you design a project, how can you think of different indicators to measure the outcome of the project? In your M&E framework, like what kind of indicators can you measure? What are sort of easy ways to measure them? Like what kind of data sets can you use to measure them? So this is what we're working on as well. And this is maybe just the last word on that, because this is also, for example, like an organization like IUCN, right? They're sort of they present themselves a bit as the NbS police, right? So they have like their global standard, and they say you have an NbS when it meets the global standard. But actually, if you look very closely at the global standard is a process framework, right? It's not an outcome framework. So it says only like, you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this. But you can still get a really bad project even if you comply to the global standard, because it just says what you have to do. So this is this is a challenge for us, right? In our project implementation, like how do we measure the outcomes, and how do we sort of deal with sort of scrutiny from organizations, and how do we communicate to the donors that we do good nature-based solutions. But yeah, we're working very closely with IUCN. I'm also teaching in their global standard course, and we're doing knowledge projects together and stuff like that. But that's an ongoing challenge.
I'm afraid that we're gonna have to say bye-bye, because we cannot take you for like we cannot take away your time. There is more questions in the chat, so maybe I can also send them to you, and if you have the time, you can answer. I'm sorry if we cannot address those questions right now. They seem a little bit complex at the moment. So, but it was very nice to have you with us, Boris. And honestly, I'm sorry that we cannot stay for longer, because I had questions too. But maybe I will reach out after the talk to have a brief exchange. Thank you for your time.
I mean, if you want, I could stay like 5 minutes or something. So I don't know if there's one more question, but I'm happy to this generates so much discussion and questions. So it's good, and also need. Yeah, I'm a bit worried if I get a list of questions later on. I'm not sure how much time.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you the question now. If you're okay with it, I'm gonna ask you the question.
Yeah, let's do it now. But I just wanted to mention that this study, this example from Indonesia that I just presented, the academic paper also just got accepted. So there will be an academic paper out in probably in a couple of weeks, which has all the technical details and stuff. So if you want, learn more about that.
Yes, that's very nice. So we look forward to reading the paper. I wanted to bring up the question from Lena. Lena asks something related to gray and green infrastructure. You mentioned that the combination of gray infrastructure and NbS is especially important in developing countries. I suppose this is due to the fact that nature is more destroyed in many developing countries. But A, is it really right to generalize this correlation? Gray infrastructure is even more important in developing countries. And B, you also presented the OPEX is higher for structural implementation than for NbS. Does this create a problem, especially in developing countries with possibly lower financial and other resources? Clarification. We can't solve everything with external resources being used to sustain the solution, ... And somebody asked to have an answer also in relation to this question and the operational costs or operational expenditures. Do you want to comment on this point?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a little bit of nuance on the first piece. Like, no, I'm not saying that gray infrastructure is sort of more important in developing countries or in low and middle income countries, and more, I think I'm more like making the point that we should tell an honest story, right? If we talk to infrastructure sectors about nature-based solutions, we should say, we should be honest and say, okay, there is probably a combination of the two that you need, and probably in some areas you're still going to need some gray infrastructure. So it's not, I'm not trying to say that we should focus more on gray infrastructure in developing countries. I'm just saying, like, because there is often such a sort of high investment need, there's often very little well-functioning or well-maintained gray infrastructure, which sort of increases or which makes it more important for us to be honest about this, right? That it's often a combination of green and gray, and that NbS are not a solution to all your infrastructure challenges. So that is the first piece. On the OPEX side, yeah, I mean, that is very true, right? That is a big challenge, and I mean, on the one hand, it's an advantage that in some cases the capex is lower than the gray infrastructure alternative, so you can get more money for your more investment for your dollar. But at the same time, indeed, you have to think about the maintenance needs and operational costs from the get-go. So what you often, of course, this is the issue for any infrastructure investment, right? Also gray infrastructure. But what you see often is that when you invest in gray infrastructure, it kind of works okay for the first 30 or 40 years, even though you don't do that much. Whereas with NbS, you need to think about it from the start, and indeed this is an issue, right? So we in our projects we do different things, right? So there's one, for example, in urban parks, what we do quite a lot, what we've seen in several projects, is that you have more, you try to develop a business case, right, around the park that can help cover some of the costs. So in some cases, like in this project that I showed in Mozambique, there are shops and businesses in the park that pay a fee for being in the park, and this fee is used for management of the area, right from the beginning. Another way to do it is more like, land value capture or land value development, preparing land that's ready for development. So I work myself on a project in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, where it's a large urban catchment flood risk project. So there is going to be, there is this river in the middle of the city where, the floodplain is becoming a park. So the floodplain is, it's flooding every 10 years or so, 5 years, maybe more often nowadays. And the biggest part of it is becoming green space, but there's also 200 hectares where, which becomes is ready to be built up for apartments and stuff. So there is a big transaction of like, I think it's like $200 million or something like that, where the project is actually going to make money by sort of creating land value, by reducing the flood risk of that specific area, and then this money is going to be owned by an independent agency that manages the floodplain and that is sort of doing the watershed management and the park management and stuff like that. So it's really about creating sort of a business case and a financing structure right from the beginning to be able to do all the monitoring and maintenance that is needed.
Thank you very much for addressing this question. I'm very grateful for your time, Boris. We are going to let you go. I think your video is frozen, but I hope you can still.
I saw something like that. Yeah.
But thank you so much for being here and for sharing your work with us. And thank you also for the resources that you share with us. So there is a virtual round of applause for you, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much
For your work at the World Bank.
Perfect. Yeah, no, thanks so much. And it's great to see so much discussion and so many questions. So, really happy to do this. And thank you, Marta. And yeah, let me know if there's anything else I can, I can provide or I can help with. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, Boris. Bye-bye.